And I can use this, I think.
Hi all, my name is Emily and I wanted to thank you so much for joining us tonight for our virtual wine tasting with Jack Keegan. Jack is an administrator emeritus who taught the ever-popular viticulture and enology class for 25 years at Miami. Jack's wine class is always full, his wine tastings are always well attended, and tonight is no exception. The Miami University Alumni Association is so excited for the opportunity to bring Jack to you to help kick off your Labor Day weekend. There is an Ask a Question box located on the bottom of the screen, and I will be monitoring these questions throughout, so please feel free to ask any questions you may have, and I will relay them to Jack throughout the tasting. With all of that being said, take it away, Jack.
Good evening, and welcome to everybody. I know a number of my friends and so many people I know who are out there, and it really does make it quite special. I hope this will be a good kickoff to a great Labor Day weekend for you. If you are like Oxford, you're going to have a beautiful Labor Day weekend. It is absolutely going to be. The weather is beautiful. In fact, if I were on my deck tonight, I would probably put a fire in my fire pit because it's going to be that cool. So it really is pretty nice for this. Sort of like alumni weekend, Mark.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Again, something else that we're not all together for. But here, the tasting order, some of you have asked how we are going to taste these. And so, again, I thought I would tell you, and so you can set them up in that way if you're tasting all five. If you're not, also, that's fine. As you can see, they're all 2019s. By the way, I will tell you that many of these rosés are made very, very well. And many of the 18s are still drinking beautifully, but because they're rosés and people don't expect them to age, sometimes you can find some really good sales. My typical thing is I'm not as bad as some people. I've actually known people who used to go into Trader Joe's when they still have $2 chuck, and of course it was always changeable. So they would go buy a bottle, go into their car, open it, taste the wine. If it was good, then they would go back in and buy a case. I'm not that bad, but it certainly is a possibility. But you can find some really nice ones. And again, we're getting to the end of rosés, which is also sort of crazy because the weather will stay nice. Many of the rosés work very well for Thanksgiving because turkey's not a real strong flavor. And so there's no reason not to continue drinking them. And they really are, as you'll see, a lot of differences in them. And we'll talk about all of the differences with all of that also. So that is the tasting order that you can see. And some of these things came as a surprise to me, and I will share them as we go along. I always like to start with something, or at least tell you what's happening in the world of wine, sort of keeping you sort of almost at the cutting edge with all of that. And one of the most important things is there's a new AVA. AVA stands for American Viticultural Area. And so, Napa is made up of Oakville and Rutherford and the various parts of that. Well, this is the same thing. And so Royal Slope is in Washington State. It's all within the Columbia River Valley, but it has different growing conditions, etc. So it's about 1,900 acres under vine at the moment. And so that's what's happening with all of that. As I'm sure you've all seen in the news, fire has continued to be a real problem in California, but not so much. And luckily, I don't think we've had any wineries burned down. There's been a couple of outbuildings that have gone, but no wineries. And one of the reasons is, as they have realized through the 17 fires, etc., grapes make a great fire break. They may harm or scorch the first row or two, but after that, because they're green, the fire really doesn't get into the vineyard. And so that's not the problem. The problem is what is called smoke taint. And smoke taint is, of course, you have all of that smoke and all of those noxious fumes and smells coming off of them. And so because of that, this can cause the wines to not taste good and, in fact, not be usable. The problem is, two things. One is that a lot of wineries are already not accepting the grapes unless it has been tested. Well, the problem between COVID and everything else, with more perfect storms than you want to think about, it takes a long time and sometimes to get the tests back so that then you can tell them that, oh no, my grapes don't have smoke taint. So it's a catch-22, and that's a real problem. It's going to be very difficult for some of the growers there in there. Also, those places that don't have fires near them, many of the outdoor tastings, because again, it's safe to be outdoors, have been canceled due to poor air quality. And so a number of places in Sonoma and Napa where they are not near the fire, but the air hangs and the smoke hangs, they have in fact canceled tastings for that reason. The Hennessy fire has burned 33% of Napa Valley, but most of it has been around Lake Berryessa and up in sort of the woodlands. And so for the most part, the wineries have been spared. It's the smoke tank that's a problem. See, in 17, the fires were later. Again, why would you remember this? But it was October. And so by that time, most of the grapes were already in the winery. And so they didn't have to worry about smoke taint. With fires in August and September, most of the grapes have not been picked, certainly the reds. And so this is why it's a real problem in this. One good thing, of course, especially as I left, I saw this one thing for high-frequency wine drinkers, have increased their online purchases by 50% since COVID-19 has come on. And I'm really not surprised. I have a dear friend, which I will allow to remain nameless, who told me he spent $800 on wine last month. And I'm not surprised because there are, in fact, some really good buys out there. In fact, I have to give my class, and I would be happy to put it out there too, some of the flash sites. I shouldn't say this either, but I actually picked up a case of champagne today because the price was $19.99. Now, you cannot get a bottle of champagne in Ohio for less than $39.99. And so it was half price. And so it's like, well, it's not like I don't enjoy drinking champagne, so I bought it. In fact, it's interesting. With the thing, wine.com had finished with over a 263% increase in growth, in sales growth over the last year. And so because they are the largest online retailer, they have done very, very well for themselves. So that's just some information that is going out there in the world of wine. And how could I not do this? Again, everybody needs another picture of Brad Pitt. This is, in fact, if you need something to wait for, on October 15th, you may know that he and Angelina Jolie, even though they are no longer, quote, together, they still own Miraval, which is a winery very well respected down in Provence. They make a rosé. And so they work with Pierre Peters, who is an extremely well-respected champagne producer. And so they are releasing on October 15th, Fleur de Miraval exclusivement, I screwed that one up, exclusivement rosé champagne. They're only making 1,500 cases, so place your orders now. And so you see him, in fact, with Monsieur Perrin walking the estate down there in Provence. So I thought that would be something to share. Speaking of sharing, or maybe oversharing. Oh, this was interesting too, I found today. Look at this beautiful winery. I will almost guarantee you have no idea where it's from. And that's because it's from Brazil. And I just finished reading this really interesting article. I know that, in fact, Brazil has been making sparkling wines for a very long time. Well, now they are doing more and more to get into the market. They're extremely small at the moment. I think their imports to the United States was only $1 million last year. But they are making some very interesting wines. In fact, I knew about sparkling wines from Brazil because the grape that they used, of course, used to be called Prosecco. But they started making Prosecco in Brazil. So what did the EU and the Italians did? They changed the grape name, or they said Prosecco was the region, and they used an older name for the grape, which is Glera. And they grow a lot of Glera down there, but now they can't call it Prosecco. So if they want to call it Glera, and if you know that's the grape that makes Prosecco, that's perfectly good. They just can't call it Prosecco anymore. So I thought I would give you a little cutting edge. Look for wines from Brazil. And I actually also have a friend who imports wines from Bolivia, and they really are pretty good. The world of wine expands all the time. And it's fun to explore those things and not drink the same Chardonnay or Cabernet every time. Nothing wrong with that. But still, it's fun to see everything that's out there. Oh, this is the oversharing part. As you can see, or maybe some of you don't recognize this is Snoop Dogg. And Snoop Dogg came out with his own brand of 19 Crimes, which was the extremely successful Australian wine brand that used convicts who were first sent over to Australia to, in fact, sell their wines because they had these little things that you could actually hear their stories by using the app. Well, a friend of mine saw this, and he sent this to me and wrote me and said, I saw this and thought of you. I wasn't sure whether I should be flattered or appalled. I still haven't decided which one. But I was talking to the distributor today, and maybe I should say flattered, because he told me that in the Cincinnati area, they got 1,000, you hear me? 1,000 cases of this wine, and they sold out in less than 3 weeks. From what he said, Jungles has like 4 cases left, but every place else is sold out. Kroger Oxford sold out in less than a week. Everybody has sold this out. We were also talking, again, a name you may not be familiar with. Lord knows I wasn't. Post Malone made a rosé. He sold 50,000 bottles within 2 hours when it went on sale online. And it's like $20 a bottle, which is expensive, as you now know, for rosés. And in fact, it sold very well. And I think, in fact, it sold out at Jungles. So just a few things going on with all of that. So let's talk about rosé. Again, I saw these pictures. As you can see on the one side, it is, in fact, the old picture of Matus, and of course the new label. And for those of you who grew up or went to college in the 60s or early 70s, you are probably very, very aware of these sparkling rosés that were made. That and Lancers were the two. But since we're talking about rosé, let's have one. The first wine we're going to try, of course, on your list is Ava Grace. And this is a rosé from California. We're actually starting and ending with California. And we'll talk a little bit about how things are made, etc. But it's always fun to have a little wine to taste during that time. So again, if you look at the color, do I need to stop sharing, or does Emily take care of that? I can never remember. I stopped sharing. Am I right?
Nope, you're good to go, Jack.
Oh, was I? Okay.
Yep, just keep sharing it.
Okay. We change platforms so often, I don't even know who my name is sometimes. Except we had to switch it because my name wasn't there in the beginning. So again, look at the color. It is really beautiful. And again, I have drunk a lot of rosés. I've done a lot of information on rosés, but more and more, the lighter colors, especially from southern France, are what they're considered for quality. But you will find, and we will talk about wines from all over the world, you will find some great rosés in all kinds of ways. And we'll talk about how they're made. But let's talk about and taste this wine first. Beautiful color. I mean, just that wonderful light pale salmon. Really, really nice. And if you swirl and smell this wine, I just can't, it's like hints of watermelon. Sort of a nice floral, maybe actually some strawberries there too. Nice and fresh, but actually with a little bit of a savory note in there also. And of course, if you taste this wine, I'm sorry, I think this wine is a steal. It has such good, fresh flavors. It comes in, I mean, just really, again, it's watermelon and maybe actually a little sort of a few, honeydew there with a little bit of strawberry and just fresh and clean and nice. And at this price, I mean, you simply cannot beat this wine. I really feel in many ways it's a good one to start with. Granted, it's not the most complex wine, but, and rosés can be, but for summertime drinking or for having a glass out on the deck like this evening, I mean, what could be better? I mean, seriously. I mean, it just is such a nice little wine. Yeah, and even has a little bit of a smoky quality in the finish. And I think has enough oomph to it to stand up with a lot of foods. I mean, right away, I think of Pinot Noir, etc. But you could certainly do this even with smoked salmon or with regular salmon, certainly chicken. Certainly any number of summertime things would be very good. I'd like to try it with pesto. I really think that it really would be really food friendly. Just has a little bit of sweetness, and the residual sugar, I think, is quite low. In fact, residual sugar is 6 grams per liter, which means 0.6%. And typically you can taste about your threshold is typically about 0.5. So this is right at the threshold of, I taste a little bit of sweetness. And I really think that's where that is. So it really is in a nice place. And for a summertime wine, and especially for an aperitif, I think this wine is a winner. And, and again, it's one of those things like, it's really inexpensive, but it's like, if it's a good wine, it's a good wine. What difference does it make in all of that? It is what's interesting because I had to do, in fact, a lot of searching. In fact, I had to write the company, and they didn't want to tell me right in the beginning. And I pushed them, and they would never give me percentages. I don't understand why. I have no problem with this, but I'm like, well, what are the grapes in it? I'm doing a wine class. I'm not comfortable talking about a wine if I don't know what grapes are in it. And so it is a blend of Grenache, which is, as you will see, a very common rosé grape. A little white Zinfandel, which is fine and unusual to a bit, but white Zinfandel is basically a sweet rosé. I mean, there's no question about it. And French Columbard, which I thought was interesting. The French Columbard used to be a grape. In fact, you may remember, again, from the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of French Columbards on the market. And there are, and I haven't tried to find one in a good while. There used to be some excellent French Columbards, and still are. The people who really enjoy that grape.
Hey, Jack, sorry to interrupt you. Will you share your slides again?
Oh, sure. Be happy to. Sorry.
Thank you.
I have to escape, don't I? And where am I this time? Here. Share screen. Share screen. Hit that.
And then
Oh, heavens help me. Thanks, Emily. Make it big. You can see we practice this a lot. And anyway, a blend of Grenache, now that you can see it, white Zinfandel and French Columbard. And as I mentioned, French Columbard can make some excellent wines. It's just that it's always been used as a blending grape. It's also been put into a lot of inexpensive wines. I'm sure Franzia uses a lot and those kinds of things with this. But the blend, they have even said, and I'm sure it does, it changes practically every year. But as I said, you now know more than practically anyone because I had not only checked with the rep, but then he checked with his boss, and they went through, and all they sent me, of course, was the tech sheet, not anything else about that. And so, as I said, it was only that she agreed to tell me what the grapes were in there. And I'm thinking, I don't have a problem. I like the wine. I don't care what's in it. Well, sort of. But it's fine. So I hope you enjoyed that. I just think that's a really, really nice, very nice entry-level rosé. It's just so tasty. Okay? So let's talk a little about rosés and how they're made. And there are actually sort of 3-4 ways to make rosés. Again, it's just funny. I mean, when I do these talks, I spend a fair amount of time, reading articles and delving into it, much more deeply. So I have a better idea of what I'm talking about and not just sort of give you a surface stuff. And so it's fun reading some of the articles and what people have to say. Most rosés are made, and especially the ones from the south of France, are done what is called limited skin maceration. That sounds really technical, but all that means is they crush the grapes and then they allow the grapes and the skins to sit there from 6 to 48 hours, depending on the amount of color and other flavors and aromas they want to get out of the skins. Because if you remember, white wine is made by taking the grapes and simply pressing them right away. In fact, the second thing down there, direct pressing, is done with some red grape varieties. In other words, they don't give it any skin contact or minimal skin contact, just what comes in the press. And so those usually make the very, very lightest wines that have just that very almost sort of onion skin kind of color to it. And that's what you'll see. But most of them that are made with limited skin maceration. And that's especially true. They use Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, Cinsault, a number of grapes from the south of France to make them. And you can make a rosé out of anything. And I think I've practically had rosés made out of practically anything. And we have an amazing array of grape varieties tonight that you will see. So limited skin maceration is certainly one of the major kinds that are there. Direct pressing, as I said, typically little to no contact with the skins, and so they are very light. Third is Sanye. Sanye, obviously, is a French term, and it means bleeding. You see the word, we use the word sanguine in English. And so it is, and so Sanye means bleeding. And how this is made is, if you want to concentrate a red wine, in many cases, maybe you don't think it has enough flavor, or there's some other things. Maybe I never thought about this. Maybe the berries are pretty big, and so you have not a good ratio of skins to juice. What you can do is, after a few hours of maceration, you will pull off some of that extra juice to concentrate the rest of the juice so that you have a more robust red wine. Obviously, I mean, I guess they could just throw it away, but they don't. They make a rosé out of it. And some of them, they do that a lot with Pinot Noir, and some of them can be very good. But I was laughing because I was reading this article, not surprisingly, by a gentleman from Provence, and he basically, it was great because he said, Sanye, none of them can be any good, because it just of the way. And I'm thinking, well, there's really not a whole lot of difference. I mean, you're not using all the juice, you're using part of it, and it was macerated. So I don't understand exactly why. But, again, that's not how he makes it. So, of course, that's the way it works. So you will see that, in fact, that is certainly true in some. But there are wines, and some very nice wines, that are made by the Sanye method. I don't think we have any, though, tonight in there. Finally, and we do, in fact, wine number one is one of them, is blending. Now, blending is illegal in Europe, except only under special circumstances. But it is, as it says, it is blending, taking basically a white wine and adding some red grapes to it, adding some red juice to it, or red wine, so that you make it into a rosé. I say it's illegal, but it's not really illegal in Europe. What they do is they make special categories. So in other words, if you drink a rosé from France, or if you drink a Rosado from Spain, or Rosado from Italy, those are all made by the limited skin maceration. But if you drink, I'm almost sure, Clarete, which in fact you'll see the name later, it's a wine that I really like. They are made. We are having, in fact, one of the wines we're having tonight is blended. And so it's Spanish. Instead of calling it Rosado, they call it Clarete. And so it's just in a different category. And there are other wines like that. In Italy, they make Frappato, if I'm not mistaken, and it's done the same way. The one that's the best, and actually I think the sort of most perverse, for lack of a better term, right off the top of my head, is that rosé champagnes are almost all made this way. So in other words, you make a clear champagne, and then through the whole aging process, and at the very end, when you add what's called the dosage, where you add some sugar to balance it out, then you add a little Pinot Noir typically to give it the pink color. The reason being is, if you do the skin maceration at the beginning to make it a rosé, it tends to turn orange. And a lot of people don't like that color, where if you wait till the end, it is pink. And so that is the most important. And it's sort of funny. Friends of mine and I were in Champagne a few years ago, and we were at a very good producer, Charles Heitzig. And the woman who was doing this, I was explaining to her, and of course I'm in Champagne, I'm explaining to her that people do this, and she just looked at me like I had three heads. No, they don't. It's like, okay, I wasn't going to argue with her. But it is, in fact, very, very true that, in fact, that's how most rosés are made. So those are the four ways that, in fact, you can make a rosé with that. So again, so it sort of makes it interesting to see. And when you buy a rosé, very often it'll probably be on the back label. They may tell you some more information about exactly how that wine is made. Okay, so let's try a second wine. Our second wine is actually from Provence, not Provence itself, but Aix-en-Provence. And that is the Bieler, père et fils, father and son. And it is, in fact, from Aix is a little higher in the hills. And actually, in fact, You can see if you look at the bottom of the label on your screen, it says Coteaux d'Aix-en-Provence, and that is because it is the hills. Coteaux is the plural for hills, côte, in French. And so it's actually in the hills, and it's a much cooler climate. And so they pick a little later. And so this is one of the things that Bieler is sort of known for, or sort of proud of, in some of the things, in fact, that they do. I'll go to the next one right away, and then we can talk about the tasting, so I won't have to sort of go back and forth. It is from Aix-en-Provence. This wine is 35% Grenache. It is 33% Syrah. It is 13% Cinot. As I said, I mean, it's just sometimes you just have this entire thing. 12% Cabernet, which I found fairly amazing because I don't know that they grow a lot of Cabernet in the south of France. And 7% Roll, which is a word that's used a lot in the Loire, but it's actually, well, probably in France, but then it's actually the grape Vermentino, which is a white grape that is used a lot in Italy. In fact, I just read an article. Keep your eye out for Vermentinos. I read an article that they were saying that there are more producers getting interested in that. They're making some great ones with Vermentino, great white wines in Italy with that. And so it is, in fact, the number one selling rosé from the south of France in America. And so they sell a lot of this. And it really was the son who really took, or sort of, picked up the ball from his father and really ran with it and made it the best-selling one that it is, especially because he came to the United States and actually had a pink Cadillac, and he sold out of his car. And he still makes a wine that, in fact, makes mention of that fact. So it's sort of interesting. So should we taste this wine? Again, beautiful, light color in this wine. And so you see the really nice light color there. You can also, of course, if you swirl and smell this wine, very different. It's, for lack of a better word, almost fleshier. It's bigger than the first wine and more savory. There's still strawberries and cherries, but there's a savory note in there too. Yeah, maybe a little smoky. And of course, if you taste this wine, oh yeah, strawberries. A little drier. In fact, let me look and see. It's really interesting. You get these things, and then very often they won't give you alcohol. pH, which is low, 3.3 TA, but not the sugar. So this actually may be finished to dryness. And I think this probably is. Certainly below 0.5 in there. And so you really don't get it. But boy, it's so juicy. I mean, it just, your salivary glands just work overtime when you're drinking this wine. And again, it's that strawberries and watermelon really come out in this wine. Really, really fun. And very good. I mean, and the thing is as I mentioned in the opening, the rosés are so big in France, and they have increased tremendously. I mean, it used to be not even that long now, maybe for others, but not for me. But like 15 years ago, you couldn't find them, and then they started, especially on the coast. And now, of course, the increase year by year has been astounding. I think, and this is just off the top of my head, certainly more than 20-25%. Every year for a number of years. Rosés have finally, and especially as I think I mentioned once before, now there are ones that are actually even called brosé, so it took away the sort of, girly drink kind of stupidity that is out there. So again, very, very nice wine. Oh yeah. Good for a summer night. Okay.
Jack, do you have time for a couple of quick questions?
Yes, I was going to say that. Thank you, Emily.
Perfect. So Allie wants to know, how do South African rosés compare? She said she has the De Morganzen 2018, and she wants to know how that compares. And don't mind my pronunciation.
Well, actually, if it's a Zinfandel, is that what you're telling me?
No, she said it's a South African rosé.
Yeah. Okay. But it all depends, as you can sort of see, to an extent on what grape they're using. They tend to be, I think, also a little bigger in them. And I feel so badly for the South Africans. And in fact, it really is good that you're drinking a South African rosé because of COVID, twice now the government, in fact, has stopped shipments out of South Africa, and they are not letting anyone drink in South Africa. They cut off alcohol sales again. And so consequently, this has been devastating to the wine industry in there. But they tend to be sort of bigger and fleshier. I've not had that wine, and so I cannot tell you for sure. But they tend to be a little heavier. It should be a little darker in color, I would think, sort of off the top of my head. Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, we have two other quick ones. Before I get to those, I wanted to say one thing. Andrew and Christine wanted to say happy 15th wedding anniversary to their Miami merger friends, Nate and Liz, who were supposed to be in Munich for Oktoberfest, but are now celebrating with you, Jack. I wanted to say that really quick, but
Prost.
So Jack wants to know, he said he got this wine from a can, the first wine that you did.
Yes, she's absolutely correct.
Does that affect flavors measurably, or is it similar to the bottle?
You know, that is a really good question. And I'm going to have to get a can of that myself to figure it out. It's terrible, the research I do. And I really do, because it should not. Because when they do these cans, they line the can. And so it should be just as inert as glass is. But that's a really good question. And in fact, because I obviously saw, as I was looking and getting pictures together, I did see that I know that in fact it's sold in cans, but I haven't tried it. And so I need to do that because, as I said, I have no problem drinking that wine. So I have no problem probably drinking the can either. But that's a good point. It should not be, but I don't know. And if someone wants to leave me a note, I will try it and get back to them.
All right, one more from Gil. He says, should rosé be chilled to drink?
Yes, but to an extent. My problem is all too often we drink our whites and rosés too cold. I want them to be maybe in the 50s, 55 to 60. And of course, they'll warm up in the glass. Because when a wine is too cold, as we say, I mean, they're dumb. And so, and some places, they store beer at the same place they store wine. Well, beer, of course, has to be kept cold. And so the wine is cold. And so I spend so much of my time with my hands clutched around my wine glass, trying to warm it up so I can actually smell something out of it. And so it should be refreshing. But I don't think it should be cold. I mean, yeah, once it gets about 70, that's too high. And probably even 65, but below 65, a little refreshing. I mean, 20, well, depending on your refrigerator, 20 minutes or 10 or 15 minutes in an ice bath should be more than enough for that wine to be drinkable. And sometimes I actually like it better even after it warms up. How often? Well, today. I shouldn't tell you this either, but I've tried a couple of wines today with a rep. And so again, it was too cold. And after it opened up, it's like, oh, this is just so much better. Sometimes it would be the opposite too. I opened a bottle for some students recently. And when I smelled the wine, I'm like, I think it's corked. And so luckily, because it was an older wine, it was 09, I had another bottle down in the cellar. And so I came to get it. And so we opened it and I was like, oh yeah, this is different. And then I went back to the cork bottle, and because it had had some air, it was corked. I mean, the smell was just terrible. And that is, it smells musty if you haven't had a corked wine or you don't know that you've had a corked wine. They smell musty like a damp basement. And it really was. It was vile for that. And so, yeah. Temperature is important. I try not to be, too doctrinaire about those things. But yeah, a little bit of a chill is good. Too much is bad. It's the typical Goldilocks. Not too much, not enough, just in the right place is good. Okay? Anything else, Emily?
Nope, we're good to go.
Sure. Now, places and styles of rosé. Rosé are made all over the world. And I certainly have drunk them from all over the world. And again, as I was getting ready for this class, I was reading articles and getting experts' opinions and all kinds of things like this. Provence, when we really think of rosé, we really think of Provence first. This, of course, is the south of France. And they make a ton of it down there. And typically it is made from the grapes we talked about, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, Cinot, and they do bring different things to the blend. And so this is why, in fact, they're often blended. They do not spend a lot of time with skin contact, and they work very hard. For example, even the Bieler, when they pick those grapes, it's not like, oh yeah, here's our grapes, let's throw them together. They actually vinify each one of those grape varieties separately. And then they do the blending. And in many cases, they may use different yeast for the different grapes, and then they do the blending. So it's not like, oh yeah, here's a filled blend, let's throw everything together. Far from it. And that is certainly what they do down in Provence too. And it's, excuse me, it's not easy to make a good rosé, I think, in a lot of ways. You'd think it would be, but it's like, you've got to get it right. And you don't want it to be too sweet and syrupy, and yet you don't want it to be too dry. And so getting that sweet spot takes some work, and they do that a lot down there. The most famous rosé from the South is from Tavel. And Tavel was in fact, whenever, again, sort of my history, the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s, if you were going to drink a serious rosé, the only one was in fact from Tavel. And they are dry, and they are typically also blends. It's, again, the Syrah, Grenache, Cinot, and many ways. And again, very, very white soils and very, very good. In Spain, there are a lot of Rosados, and very, very good, made in Rioja, made in a number of other places. And of course, because of the bandwagon, more and more people are making them. Look for Muga. Muga has always been one of my absolute favorite wineries. I've used them many times in class for their reds. And the Rosado is not expensive and very, very good. We'll be having, in fact, another one of my favorite wines from Spain in a moment. In Italy, in Bardolino, which is up there in the Veneto, look for Clarete. Part of me, of course, is they're not real common, and that's why I didn't use them. But wow, I love those wines. They have a little bit of substance to them, and they're just so drinkable. So that may not be a word that you're familiar with, so jot it down. You'll love those wines. They really are. Again, you wouldn't think Austria, but I was shocked. Schloss Gobelsberg, which I've used their Gruner Veltliner many times in class. I happen to be reading they make a rosé. It probably doesn't come into Ohio, which is why I'm not familiar with it, but it was on somebody's top list of wines. Germany, again, because of them making, well, to an extent, Dornfelder, but especially Pinot Noirs, and especially probably from Baden, make some really good ones. Again, dry, crisp, really nice. And then, of course, California and the Finger Lakes. I was looking at some wines from the Finger Lakes, some rosés from some of my favorite wineries. Lamoureux Landing, Herman Wiener, some other ones. I'm thinking, wow, those would be really, really fun to try. And so there really are some nice wines out there from the various places and styles of rosé, because some of them can be very dark, almost a Pinot Noir kind of rosé or red color, to some of them, of course, that you see being practically white in that. Okay, so let's go to that third wine. And the third wine we're having is Ontanon. And it is, in fact, as I mentioned, well, several things. If you look at this label, you see it is from Rioja. And Rioja, of course, is still is basically the primary or best region, many people think, in Spain. Known, of course, for the Tempranillo grape and for the wonderful Riojas that they do make there. Ontanon is a very good producer of reds also. But this is one of those specialized wines. As you see on the label, and if you have this, you see it, it is Clarete, which means it is actually a blend of red and white. And they're very open about it. It's right there on the label. It is Diora, which is also, by the way, it gets so confusing sometimes. It's also known as Macabeo, where a lot, especially in the area where Cava comes from, they're the same grape, just called different things from different parts of the country. And the other one, of course, is the prime grape from Rioja, Tempranillo. It is 75 75% Diora, 25% Tempranillo. So they get a little bit of skin contact, and that's what gives it the very, very, very light color that is there in there. And in fact, again, I delved in very deeply today about the whole thing between Rosados versus Clarete. And I probably should have switched that and said Clarete versus Rosado, because you see the two very different colors on that screen of the wines, because the one on, I imagine at your left, is the lighter Clarete, and then the other one, made by the same person, is, of course, a Rosado. And so these are some of the differences that you see in the wines, and you will see coming out of Spain. But let's try this wine. If you swirl and smell, I have to say, and especially for the price, and of course I like all these. I mean, I picked them. I love this wine. I just think this wine is just so beguiling. It just really just sort of just takes you right into the glass. Nice and fresh, and not, it's a different aroma profile. I'm not getting as much of the really bright fruit, more cherries than, say, strawberries and watermelon. Oh, yeah, so pretty. Have you tasted this wine? More substance than the other two. I mean, it really is. I mean, that would stand up. Oh, gee. I mean, you could do that with pork. You could do that, in fact, with pork on the grill. I did a couple of tenderloins just a few days ago that I had marinated. And, I'm thinking that would be excellent with that, because actually I use a little orange juice with some other things in the marinade. And I think right away that some of the citrus notes that are underlying there would go very, very well with all of this. I did laugh. There is, I get their text sheets. And of course, this was entirely in Spanish. And my Spanish isn't actually that good in there. But they talk about how it's made in 75% Diora, 25% Tempranillo, very typical of the zone in there. And they talk about with the things, and they say, of course, with fish, with pastas, and various other things there with aperitifs. Of course, they're going to tell you, you can eat it, you can drink it with anything. What else they're going to tell you? But it is. I think it's just so tasty. And just, it has, I mean, it really has a noticeable finish. I mean, that wine is still there. And I've been talking and talking. And that wine is really still there. That flavor is still there, and it hangs with you. And it's still only 12.5% alcohol. I mean, another wonderful thing about these wines is they tend to be fairly low in alcohol. And so that's, really nice about this. It just has a savory quality to it that I just like so much. And almost floral. I mean, it really comes out now. It's really not those fruit aromas. It's really almost like a floral aroma. So tasty. So, yes, so that's just some of the things that are going on. Any questions before we get to the next one, Emily?
Yes, we do have a couple. A couple people have asked about when you were talking about wine being corked. Could you explain what you mean about that? They're asking about if it's the actual cork of the wine or if it's how it makes it taste.
Be glad to. Two things. And it is, unfortunately, a little confusing. In fact, it is funny, as you probably noticed. We have no corks tonight. All of the wines are screw caps. And again, and that is perfectly fine. In fact, for so many wines, especially these wines, which are meant to be drunk from 1 to 3 years in bottling. And of course, everyone drinks them the same year. And so it's not surprising that they are done that way. But when we have a bottle with a cork in it, we say that the wine is cork finished, meaning obviously when it's done and it goes into the bottle, you put the cork in, okay? So the difference is that when a wine is corked, what happens is, and it usually comes, in fact, from the cork, but not necessarily. It can actually come from the winery. It can actually come from some other wood. Supposedly, it can volatilize from wood in the winery if it happens to have it. I also notice it in many, many other places. And what happens is a chemical that for you chemists out there, 2,4,6-trichloroanisole, which we simply call TCA. TCA is formed literally in parts per billion, like 3 or 4 or 5. And what it does is it ruins. I haven't heard anything different from this, but according to some Japanese scientists, what it does is it stops you from smelling the wine, and because your nose, the receptors are stopped up, what your mind does is typically give the aroma of mustiness or damp basement or wet cardboard or old tennis shoes. I mean, they literally, it is not a good smell. It is corked. And so this is what happens. In a lot of cases, it's because of bacterium, and it has to have chlorine available because it's 2,4,6-trichloroanisole. And so when they really started using chlorine to clean corks, this was especially in the 80s and 90s, it became a real problem. Now, the cork industry has spent millions of dollars trying to clean these up. And there's a cork called Diam, I think it's DIAM, that supposedly is completely cork taint free. That's another word we use, cork taint. And so it is, in fact, that material. Supposedly, and I've actually tried this with some success, if you put the wine into a carafe or, obviously into a container with a lot of saran wrap, the saran wrap will grab onto the TCA molecules, and so it will take a lot of that away. And I have found that works some, but typically, unfortunately, I just pour them down the sink. Well, actually, I don't do that. If you bought a wine and you open it and it's corked, you put the cork back in. You don't drink half of it and then say, oh, I think this is corked. You put the cork back in and you take it back to the retailer, and they will give you a new bottle, because then they will give it to the distributor and say, that's corked. And it probably goes all the way back to the winery. And the winery probably says, whoever they got the cork from, you owe us some money. And so that's it. And so it's become less of a problem, but I still find them. And it is not unknown, but it's become less. So that's corked. Anything else?
Yeah. So really quick, I wanted to say happy 50th birthday to Nancy Oliver, class of 93. But also, a lot of people are asking for your opinion on orange wines.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm glad you know about them. Orange wines are extremely interesting, and they're also all over the map. For those of you who are not familiar, when I teach the wines class, the first things that I very often show, and I still, even now that I'm still teaching and doing it online, I send them the links. There was an excellent book called Vintage, the Story of Wine. And if you go on YouTube, you can find short vignettes. Unfortunately, they were all on VHS, and I don't know why he wasn't able to get a better copy. And so they're still not the best, but still, the first one takes you back to the country of Georgia. And in Georgia, they've been making wine for 8,000 years. And what they do is they tromp on the grapes, and they then take the grapes, the skins, the seeds, the pulps, everything, and in fact, in many cases, the stems, and they pour them all into a big stone jar called a qvevri. And so it all ferments together. And so even though it's typically a white grape, and they typically are done with whites, you get the color from the skins and from everything else. And so very often the wine will turn some color of orange. And you can make them from practically any grape. And I'll be honest, they're a little hipsterish because it's something different, and they're extremely natural. The first orange wines came about, well, of course, they were always making them in Georgia, but the experimentation with those and like making wine in the clay jars called amphora and other things really began happening up in Friuli, up in the northeastern part of Italy. And they really started this trend. And now you can get orange wines from anywhere in the world. In fact, it's funny because my friend who imports wines from Central Europe and Bolivia and other places, he was talking with a local winemaker about making an orange wine. And my thing right away was, well, if you do that, you need to use one of the new like American hybrids that can make some really good wines, because no one will have made an orange wine out of Marquette or La Crescent. And these, of course, are the grapes that we talked about when I did the Michigan wine tasting. And so it's like that would be, I mean, completely unique. And so that's what you need to do. And so those are orange wines. They're wines that have been basically all fermented together with everything. And so that's why. Now, some of them are horrible, like with all wines. And because sometimes they use minimal, they don't do anything to it. The word is escaping me. No intervention, minimum intervention. Then things can go awry. It's a natural process, and you can get other bacteria in there that will turn it bad, sour, crappy. And other times they can be wonderful. And I've had some really, really good orange wines, and I'm always happy to try them. Sometimes they're also a little, because the fermentation doesn't end, and it's like the method ancestral, they'll also have bubbles. They will be bubbling because the CO2 was trapped at the end of the fermentation process. Okay? How's that?
Good to go.
Good. Okay. So we're off to New Zealand. And the wine we're having is from Matua. And you can see in many cases they are very proud of their New Zealand heritage, though the gentlemen who do it are not Maori. Again, very nice light pink, but we'll talk about the wine. I have to tell you a story. As you see on the label, it says Matua, and it says Rosé, and it says dry and elegant. Well, and even I think when I first tasted this wine this year, which I think was early in the spring, or like June or July, it's from New Zealand. And if you talk to anyone who knows anything about wine from New Zealand, and if it's not white, Sauvignon Blanc, it's going to be red, Pinot Noir. And in fact, Matua always made a rosé of Pinot Noir. Well, you notice on the label, it doesn't say Pinot Noir. And in fact, I had the rep at my house today, and I'm like, well, you know that wine I'm serving tonight isn't made from Pinot Noir. And again, I guess people have looked at me a lot that I have two heads. He looked at me like I was completely out of my mind. And in fact, he called back. He must have made 6 phone calls while we were sitting there to people, none of which had any idea. And in fact, I even called down to Jungles, and I had them send me a picture of the wine that was on their shelf to make sure, because this is not Pinot Noir. And so that was interesting. Let me tell you what it is, and then we'll taste it so that I can go back to it. They make a Pinot Noir, and of course the things in it, but this wine is 79% Merlot, 11% Malbec, 6.5% Cabernet Franc, and I loved 3.5% other. Who knows? Maybe there's Pinot Noir in it. But I just thought that was just amazing. And no one knew, again, because of changes going on between COVID and other things in the wine industry, no one bothered telling them that they had changed the rosé that they had made. And they saw a lot of it. So again, a lovely pink color, if you can, as you can see, that wine is, and if you swirl it, this Merlot blend, see again, it's darker, it's richer, a little almost like roses. Has a little bit almost like a rose petal aroma to it. That's the first thing. Oh, and then it comes up very, very different. Yeah. Not as, in some ways, not as rich as the Ontanon, but certainly not in the vein of the first two. Nice aroma. Yeah, and almost like a little baked bread. Have you tasted this wine? What I like about it is the mouthfeel. It's nice and smooth. It fills up. Woo, acidity. There's a fair amount of acidity in that wine. In fact, I still left. They say, in fact, the 19 was a long, dry growing season, and so they were. So the wine had a lot of aromatics. They made all the juice again separately in small batches, and knocked it in with different yeast, fermented. Then, of course, they selected the grapes to sort of put them all together in this. And this is, as far as I know, this might be their first outing in making these wines. Now, these wines, I would almost bet you that these grapes come from the North Island, because the South Island would be cooler, and the North Island is more known for its Bordeaux blends. So Merlot would certainly be grown in a warmer area than like in Central Otago, where they grow a lot of Pinot Noir, etc. So I'm sure that that's where this wine came from. But again, it has a really nice finish. It really is a very weighty rosé. In some ways, as weighty as many full red Pinot Noirs I've had. And so nice and clean and fresh. But again, I think it could stand up to barbecue. It could certainly stand up to pork, chicken, salmon. I mean, I really think that it would carry on very, very well with a number of different foods. And I apologize. I know some of you, in fact, ask about what foods to have. And it really is tough because I really think the rosés are very food friendly. And so, a lot of the summer fare can go very, very well with these kinds of things, especially vegetables. I made what's called a tian, which is basically a vegetable, almost like a pie with potatoes and zucchini and tomatoes and onions. And I think right away this would be so good with it. It's just the vegetables coming through with salt and pepper and olive oil. So really nice along those lines. Nice wine. Very nice wine. So I thought I would show you a few other things. Again, you see, and the wonderful thing about rosés is they're fairly inexpensive. What I'm showing you on the screen is probably one of the most expensive bottles of rosé you can buy. Chateau d'Escalans, which makes Whispering Angel, which you may have heard of, is also not an inexpensive but very good rosé, but it runs around $25 a bottle. This one runs about $100 a bottle. So I thought I would show you that you can, of course, get into stratosphere even with rosés, not just some of our, especially reds, and some whites. So I thought that was sort of fun, certainly to see in there. Any questions, Emily?
Yes, we do have a few. So a couple of people couldn't find the Matua. Somebody said that they found a 2017 one. And then somebody else said that they found, sorry, let me find it on here. Oh, the Pinot Noir.
Exactly.
But that has light rosé color. So they wanted to see if you could speak to those and their flavor.
Well, obviously as it ages, but the thing is about it, two things that Matua has going for it, and especially the Pinot Noirs. They are cool climates. And because of cool climates, they have high acidity. And because of that high acidity, they certainly, I would think that a good Matua rosé, especially a Pinot rosé, would last 3 to 5 years without any difficulty at all. So even if they're drinking the 17, it probably is still a good drink. It's probably, the color is probably a little pinker, though, of course, it starts to sort of brown out, not really brown out, but get darker with age. It probably is more pink than what we have in our glasses, because that's very typical of Pinot that's there. And it would tend to, I would think it would be sort of a little bit of forest floor, and they tend to be a bit more, sort of appley and black cherry kind of thing. It's really tough without, and of course, as I said, there isn't, in fact, the Pinot Noir is not here. But I actually, that's why I was checking about years, the 17, because I wondered if anyone had gotten the Pinot Noir, because, as I said, even the company here thought that's what they were selling. In fact, even the guy at Jungles goes, I'm shocked. I had no idea. I've told several people that it's that's a Rosé and Pinot Noir, because they changed it and no one bothered saying, hey, by the way, Matua is no longer Pinot Noir. So that's what's happening with that. Okay.
And one other one, back from the very beginning, Mary actually said, can you talk to Whispering Angel Rosé 2019? You just mentioned a Whispering Angel, and you said that the less expensive bottle from the...
Yeah, about $25. It really is, that and really the Miraval have become the Whispering Angel, especially because it was in fact a Lurton, Lurton, one of the Lurtons, of which is an extensive family in Bordeaux and very, very well known. He went, I think it was Sasha, he went south and bought something like 240 acres, of which I think 60 acres of it are under vine. And so, and part of it, of course, is hype, and of course, part of it is who the person is, but really wanted to bring that kind of attention to care and money, etc., to a rosé. And so this is what they started to do. And so, of course, he makes the flagship, which you're seeing right there, Garros, but they don't make a whole lot of it. And some years it's gotten amazing scores. The most recent one, I mean, was still very good, but for the price, 93, 94 points. But the Whispering Angel has always done very, very well. And I have not had this year's vintage, but year in and year out, they usually are really, really tasty. And I'll say again, they do a wonderful job with packaging. I mean, and of course, that's part of it. That's the appeal. And the packaging on the Whispering Angel is just beautiful. Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
people want to know, did you chill your Matua to the appropriate level that the label says when you chill it, it turns blue?
The thing is, and I saw that, but I don't know. I must have. It's blue.
Just a couple of people have asked.
No, it's funny, and I kept looking at that, and I don't think I ever did, but I'm sure I did because it wasn't in the refrigerator long, because in fact it was after the rep left, and so they were only in the refrigerator at 37 degrees for probably only about an hour, and then of course I came here, and so they were in the boxes instead of out for a half hour. So actually, I think the drinking temperature of these wines are fine. But I will have to try that the next time and make sure that I'm doing that properly.
Yeah. All right, that's all for now.
Okay, and so let's go to our last wine. The last wine is Diora, and this actually is a rosé of Pinot Noir. Fancy that. And so I thought it was fun, and we, of course, made the full trip around and back to America. Obviously, you can tell the very French overtones of this wine. By the way, it's probably the lightest of all five. And so you think, actually, that's good. Let me clear up one misconception. And that is the color of a wine does not always tell you the strength of the wine. For example, two of the lightest color reds are both Nebbiolo grapes that are in Barolo and Barbarescos, and then Pinot Noirs, which of course are in Burgundies. And these wines can be, again, depending on how they work, can be very big wines. Sometimes, in my opinion, almost too big. People over extract them because I like them to be certainly more elegant. And so just because this is the lightest wine doesn't mean it's going to be any more wimpy, etc. But it will be very different because this is a different grape than any of the grapes that we have seen. The name comes from, again, French, and that is because these are in the hills of the Santa Lucia Highlands in California. And they say, of course, they have these golden hills. Of course, one of California's nickname is the Golden State because it sounds so much better than the brown one, which it typically is in the summertime because, again, all the foliage, all the grass on the hillsides are dead because it hasn't rained for months and months. And so this is where that golden idea comes from. And, of course, La Belle Fete, the beautiful day, or whatever that you would like to from that, and Monterey. And this is actually their initial tasting or thing of this wine in there. So again, this is the San Bernarde Vineyard, where in fact it is. So it's specifically a vineyard designate. And again, I took obviously from the website, and I really do love the hills in the background, obviously an early morning shot. Hopefully that's not smoke in that from the fog. And so again, just shows you that's very typical. The fog plays a big role in moderating the temperatures of California. Never forget, if it were not for the cold ocean nearby in California, it would be a Mediterranean climate. It would always be in the 90s or 100s in the summertime, etc. But because of that cold ocean and that influx of marine air, this is why they can grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and make sparkling wines, etc. And the San Bernarde Vineyard is a very, very famous one there. I also had to add, because it was there, and I think what was it a few days ago was National Dog Day anyway. This is the winemaker and his dog Bixby. And so it was there. I thought, I had to add Bixby to the mix. And so that is, in fact, what we're talking about. Some little things. The wine itself is 100% Pinot Noir. Actually, I will now call myself a liar, and I already saw this before. This is actually 88% Pinot Noir. I should have put it up there. I apologize. 7% Grenache, and 5% Chenin. So they've actually added a little bit of white, and that's probably one of the things that they add, a little bit of Chenin. Trust me, 5% is plenty to give a more floral aroma to this wine. And this wine really puts out the aroma. I mean, I haven't put it near my nose yet, and I'm already smelling this wine big time. Sort of peachy is what I'm getting right off. So if you look at the color, that truly is onion skin. It is that very, very, very pale color in that. And I don't think they tell me they were selected. I want to see if it said harvest early in the season, small bins. I was looking to see if they said how long they might have left it on the skins, but it doesn't say that exactly with this. But it's bottled 2 months after fermentation. So it's spent most of its time in stainless steel, a small amount of it in neutral barrels. So there's no wood to this wine. So if you swirl this wine and smell it, oh, and it's Pinot Noir, and it's floral, and it's peachy. Oh, and maybe almost those wonderful Rainier cherries. Oh, so floral. And I'm not kidding you. I would not be surprised if part of that is the Chenin that's in there. Just so pretty. And again, if you taste this wine, now there again, that's a serious wine. That wine has lots of fleshiness in the palate. It's big, actually, in the palate. Wonderful sort of, strawberries now in the flavor. A little bit of lime, also. Great acidity, but it has enough of the characteristic and the fruit flavors and aromas to carry the acidity very, very well. This wine, in fact, for a first wine, was very, very well rated. Vine Pair, which is a publication online, they put it in their top 20 rosés for this year. It came out in May 2020. The Wine Enthusiast gave it 91 points. And they say strawberry, cotton candy, citrus, lime, and watermelon in the flavor. Again, yeah, pH fairly low, 3.34. They don't say anything about it. I don't really get any, so it's probably fermented to dryness. A beautiful wine, and for the price, I mean, really just a steal. I think all these wines are just wonderful values, and ones I would be, in fact, I was perfectly happy to drink in all of that. So rosés, are an amazing group of wines, and something that I think, it's always fun to explore. And, we almost use summer as an excuse, but again, figure summer starts in March and probably ends Halloween. And I think you're probably pretty good when it comes to, although actually, as I said, that Diora for Thanksgiving. In fact, a few of these, the Ontanon for Thanksgiving. I mean, again, you can buy them now, and sort of stash them away for a couple months if you can keep them that long, and enjoy them. Mm-hmm. Any questions, Emily?
Yeah, somebody asked about, they said that they could only find the 2019 Kim Crawford from New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
How does that compare? I think that was about the previous font.
Yes, and it was probably lighter. And if I'm not mistaken, they can look at it. I'm almost positive that is a Pinot Noir. And so in some ways it would be closer to the Diora than this. It certainly would not be a lot like the Matua. I mean, obviously they're from the same country, but the grapes are completely different. And I would not be surprised if the Kim Crawford is Pinot Noir.
Thank you. And then just really quick, I know you mentioned it before, but do you mind touching again on how rosé wines age and
Sure.
what's the difference in age of rosés?
I would say, and again, and these are really good examples. I think, again, if they're stored properly, mean in a cool, dry place that doesn't have a lot of vibration and no sun, and doesn't have really different extremes in temperature, they will last 3 years, I think, without much difficulty at all. Now, having said that, there are, quote unquote, serious rosés out there. I think of Domaine Haute. I think of some of the rosés from Bandol, Bandol. I think of some of these wines that can easily age, 5, 7 years or longer, and can be very nice. And of course, those you have to seek out, and some of those are more expensive. But obviously, most of these wines, and in fact, most wines in the world, are meant to be drunk. Well over 90% of them are meant to be drunk from 1 to 3 years of bottling. That's when they're enjoyable. That's when you get all these primary fruit flavors. You get all this enjoyment out of the glass. And that really has a lot to do with that. Okay?
All right, good to go.
Anything else? Well, those are our wines. But what I thought I would do, since I usually do, I started at the beginning, then I'll wait till the end. Obviously, many of you know I taught horticulture and landscaping here for a very long time. So I ran around today and I took pictures of some of my favorite trees. And so I thought I'd show you a little bit of campus and my favorite trees. This is a black gum Tupelo, for those of you who spent time at Farmer. And of course, before that, Reed. This tree has in fact been there all of that time. It will turn, unfortunately, in Oxford, our pH, the sweetness of the soil, doesn't allow it to turn the beautiful red that this wine can get, but it has this beautiful sort of Christmas tree shape, and it is a glorious tree. It has always been one of my favorites. Again, right next to it, and I really have to give kudos to the group that did that. This, of course, is the front of Farmer, and it is those sweet gums that are there that they saved, because even though Farmer is a very large and imposing building, those trees work beautifully in front of it to give it scale and size and humanity, which, of course, that's what trees do. This tree has always been one of my favorites. I always felt if there was an Ent living on campus from Tolkien, it probably, in fact, is this tree. And this is the Osage Orange that was in front of Wilson and Pine. They are no more, but the tree is. And I think, you look at the trunk of this tree, and, you sort of expect the Keebler elf to come out of there at any point in time. And so it is just a wonderful, wonderful tree. And actually, then, one of my all-time favorites, too, is this bald cypress, which is there sort of between Farmer and going back to Markham. And, of course, the dormitories back there. And, of course, this is sort of far away. And then this is getting a little closer with these wonderful sort of shells of branches. And then you go and you see these just wonderful trunk. This is something else I probably shouldn't say, but I think my statute of limitations is done. I have a great picture of one of my classes all sitting up on the branches of those trees because they are extremely strong. And this is a tree that is actually native of more southern United States, but does very, very well here in wet places, etc. And just in case you don't remember where this is coming from, this is from Miami. And of course, that's a picture of Belle. Thank you all. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, have a wonderful Labor Day weekend. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you so much, Jack. 2 more quick personal questions.
Sure.
What is your favorite rosé, and are you teaching a class this year, a wine class this year?
Well, I'll answer because again, I don't really think about that second one. I am currently teaching. I am currently teaching online, and trying to figure out if we continue online, how to get as many wines as I can to students, because that's really the problem. Is that because again, it's like this evening. I would rather obviously meet the students face to face and get to know them. Let's be honest. one of the best things about teaching is getting to know you. And so you missed that. So I've already had some of them over to the house, and I will have more over to the house because I think that's what makes it fun. My favorite rosé. So I am teaching, and I hope to continue teaching, and I'm hoping this will be done, and I can drink with the students again. I actually I shouldn't even tell you this either. I actually went to Brick for the first time on last Thursday, a week ago, because again, one of my students was leaving, and he hounded me, and one of the managers up there is a good friend, and so I actually sipped the trash can. I didn't drink the rest of that crap in there. My favorite rosés, God, there's so many good rosés. The Clarete has always been one of my favorites, certainly in that price range. I'm trying to think what else I have had that I've liked. I drink a lot of sparkling rosé. Amery, Amery, which I get on one of the flash sites for $13.99, is delicious. And so those are some of the things. So those are probably some of my favorites. Okay?
Yep, and that is all that we have tonight, Jack. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you
for joining us again. Just a reminder to everyone that we have a lot of other virtual events and webinars planned. Be sure to visit www.miamialum.org to sign up for the other fun virtual events that we have planned. Thank you for joining us tonight. As always, have a great long weekend, and love and all.